Hello and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, the local government reporter here. I'm joined this week by Ivy Secrest, our crime and public safety reporter, and Hannah Shields, our state government reporter. This week, they'll be bringing us a conversation about the MCER study, which is a cost-benefit analysis study. About this one was concerning elementary schools and how to allocate funds for Laramie County School District 1. And a board meeting on Monday night where they voted on that it was a bit controversial. But before we get into that, I'll bring you a quick recap of what's been going on in my beat this week. Some local business news. 2 weeks ago, our episode was about City Drug. After they were ordered to close and the public came out in support, and the meeting turned a bit dramatic, but last week, it was ordered by the Wyoming Board of Pharmacy that they can remain open, but the owner, Kelsey James, her pharmacy license will be suspended for 3 years, and she has to sell the business within 6 months. And also some local business news. The Sherry's restaurant in Cheyenne on Lincoln Way is closing after 42 years. Their last day of business was Tuesday, October 8th. But now let's pass it on to Ivy and Hannah. Can you guys tell me a bit about the MCER study and what's been going on with the Laramie County School District 1?
Yeah, thanks, Noah. So on Monday, the Laramie County School District 1 Board of Trustees voted on whether or not they were going to concur with the results of the MCER study. And when the study was released 2 weeks ago, or a week prior to Monday's meeting, there was almost immediate outrage from the community because the MCER study does propose closing 8 schools in order to make necessary renovations to 5 others and build 2 new ones. And the families who attend those 8 schools that would be closing obviously were quite outraged. So Monday's meeting was packed full of faculty, teachers, and other family and community stakeholders who were really concerned about the results of the study and the way that it was conducted. In order to accommodate for the rather big issue, Chairman of the Board Tim Bolin pushed public comment to after the presentation of the MCER study so that everyone could have a proper understanding of what the study was, how it was conducted, and how they got to the results that they did. According to the MCER study, the schools that would be closing should the School Facilities Commission approve it would be Miller in 2025, Deming in 2026, Jessup in 2027, Hubbard, Bain, Fairview, and Lebhard in 2029, and Henderson in 2023. The plan accounted for building years through 2035, and these facilities were classified as going offline, meaning that they would no longer be utilized for educational purposes of any kind. That didn't necessarily determine that these facilities then have to be demolished, but the study did account for demolition cost should the administration choose to go in that direction. And while the closing of those 8 schools prompted an incredibly emotional response from parents, as well as some support from facilities that really need these funds to improve, I think it's really important that we dig into why we got here and what's important about this MCER study. So before I dig into the reaction of the community on Monday, Hannah, can you tell us a bit about your reporting on the MCER study and why it was required by state statute, why the board even had to vote on whether or not to close 8 schools in the first place?
So there's a lot of background to this story that probably goes back at least 2 years because there's been a few bumps in the road in requesting funding from the state to start these school facility projects. But I'm going to start in May 2023 when former LCSD1 Superintendent Margaret Crespo announced that students would be moved out of ARP Elementary, a school in the South Triad, into Eastridge Elementary, which was used as a swing space. And the students have been there for over a year now. On a promise, that has not been fulfilled yet. And so the story behind that is, LCSD1 under Crespo was going to move forward with a demolition process on that school to take it down and then rebuild it. The issue with that is that as soon as the district dips its own funds into any sort of construction on a school, the state is then completely hands off in funding any more money towards major maintenance and upkeep on that school. So, the district put a huge pause button on that project because they wanted the state to fund it as it is constitutionally obligated to. So that's kind of like where that starts. So now we're going to fast forward to the end of the 2024 budget session when Laramie County School District 1 received enough funding to build 2 new elementary schools. Co-chair Landon Brown, who is on the legislature's Select Committee on School Facilities, and Del McComey, who is the director of the state construction department, both of them told me that these 2 new schools would likely go into the South Triad. And then that was reflected in that Mercer report that just came out last week. In February of this year, a district-wide Mercer study was launched, and it considered all the flagged elementary schools for both capacity and condition issues. At the end of that study, the Mercer consultant came back, and McComey had told me they had basically almost an infinite number of possible remedies for coming out of this study. So they've narrowed it down to 6 themes that guided the development of 18 potential remedies coming out of that study. Further analysis narrowed it even further. And the whole entire process, which took several months this year, really just focused on what is the biggest bang for the buck the district can get on these school facility projects. It's like what schools can hold on to the most amount of students. What is the most cost-effective remedy for the district so they're not constantly coming to the legislature for more money. That was the main theme of getting to this Mercer study that was presented before the board on Monday.
Yeah, so like Hannah said, this goal of finding the most cost-effective way to value the benefits and the financial expense of adding these buildings and bringing up facilities to the standard that they should be to have equitable education is what really guided this Mercer study. And School Facilities Division Administrator Shelby Carlson, alongside representatives from FEA who did the Mercer study independently, came and presented to the board Monday night to describe the final best remedy that they came to, which includes offlining 8 schools, and to answer any questions that the board may have about the process, about the results, and what their options were with voting. The way it was presented to the board on Monday night is really their options were to either vote for or against it. If the board voted in favor of this Mercer study, in favor of closing 8 schools and rehabilitating ARP, which has been a school that was displaced through this process of needing to update facilities, as well as for other schools that need updated facilities in the next 10 years, then the study would move forward to go in front of the School Facilities Commission. Once it was voted in by the School Facilities Commission at the recommendation of the board and the State Construction Department, then the funds would be released and the district would be free to kind of start these projects. If they voted against it, they would have 30 days to write up a letter explaining why the Mercer study wasn't sufficient and to propose an alternative that was not only more beneficial but more cost-effective, according to Carlson and her testimony to the board. Parents were almost split on their conviction in these 2 options. Several parents felt that it shouldn't be offered as an all-in or all-out type situation, and several board members expressed their frustration with feeling like they were put between a rock and a hard place by the statute and the legislature. One key aspect of all of this, though, that really pushed the board's final decision to support and concur with the Mercer study is ARP. So ARP Elementary and the students at ARP Elementary have been significantly impacted by poor facilities. Because ARP had exceeded its student capacity and was dealing with incredibly poor facilities, former Superintendent Margaret Crespo pulled them from their building at the beginning of the fall semester in 2023. Since then, ARP students have been in the former Eastridge Elementary facility attached to the west end of the old Cary Junior High School building. And they have been waiting for 2 years for these funds to be released so that their facility can be updated. And in the meantime, the old ARP building, according to teachers who came to testify to the school board, has been vandalized. And quite frankly, they can't go back if these funds aren't allocated. If the building isn't updated, they will not be able to go back in at all because it's in worse shape than it was when they were pulled from it in the fall of 2023.
As one said, vacant buildings are vandalized, which is happening to the ARP now. And so there's no way that we can go back. So we have no home. And our students deserve that. So I know it is an unfair decision and it's a hard decision to make. And you cannot please everyone. And I do not want to be in your shoes, but I would like you to consider that we have been misplaced and the South Side, as you can see from that, has been forgotten numerous times. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
That was ARP elementary school teacher Carrie Barker, who throughout her testimony to the board expressed how frustrating it has been for ARP students to be waiting, and really illustrating this issue of the South Triad being completely overlooked as the board continues to move forward with, finding these funds to develop these needy schools. Should the Mercer study be approved, ARP Elementary will be demolished and rebuilt as a K-4 school with a projected capacity of 550 students, and it would likely open its doors in 2028. Barker's testimony, alongside some of her colleagues, really motivated a lot of parents to be sympathetic with the plight of ARP students. Several trustees expressed how conflicted they felt about concurring with the study, as they agreed that the study wasn't sufficient. It didn't include parent input. They didn't ask stakeholders for what their needs were in the community. They didn't account for anything really beyond base cost to the state itself. But they also understood the plight of ARP students and other South Triad schools. Some parents were even motivated by the presentation to change their stance during the meeting. Marcy Kindred, a parent of children at Deming and Miller, two schools that will be taken offline should this Mercer study be approved by the commission, told the board that her initial reaction to the recommendations was to sound the alarm, get organized, get parents together to contest it. But after hearing the presentation of the Mercer study, she could not in good conscience urge the board to vote against the study, though she really wanted to.
Part of my organizing has always been on behalf of all students, not just my own. And as I heard the presentation today, and it confirmed my fears that I was just hoping they would explain differently, that it's an all or nothing thing. I cannot, with this room full of parents from the same demographic as myself, advocate for my students without considering the kids at ARP.
Not all parents were as motivated as Kindred was, though. A lot of attorneys who are also parents in the district made an appearance to discuss the statute itself and to remind the board that they weren't in as much of a all or nothing situation as they believed themselves to be, that they did have some control over whether or not they were even going to approve this study, and they did have the option to vote it down and to follow that 30-day option as well. One community member, policy analyst for the Wyoming Department of Health, Franz Fuchs, told the board that they shouldn't concur with the study because it was inherently flawed. Fuchs cited his experience with Mercer studies in the Department of Health and said that this was wholly insufficient because it didn't account for community needs. And while he totally understood the need to have professional analysts handling the numbers and the cost side of things, the benefit side of things really did need to have community input, and this Mercer study did not, which was admitted by the FEA representative who presented the study in the first place. Fuchs wasn't the only person with experience with Mercer or experience with the law that had come to speak. Jeremy Gross, a parent, brought up Wyoming Statute 2115-117. The statute specifically addresses the annual evaluation of school buildings and facilities According to the statute, the commission is supposed to ensure the adoption of the most cost-effective method of remediation for a building, as well as deliver quality education services and ensure the compliance with state adequacy standards. And really what Gross was pointing out is that a lot of the parents there were questioning whether or not this Mercer study actually focused on quality educational services and ensured the compliance with statewide adequacy standards.
And I think everybody in the room has been pointing out the second part of this equation here. This study only captures half of that equation, and it focuses only on what's cost effective at the detriment to many or most of our children. Subsection D of that statute also requires that we shall take into consideration the effects of the proposed activity on the local community. This study does not do that.
A lot of parents were concerned about the lack of public input in the Mercer study. The study didn't account for stakeholders. They didn't take any sort of qualitative data from community members in LCSD1. And a lot of parents were really concerned about the emotional impact that closing schools would have on their children. Some parents did bring up class sizes and studies done in bigger cities. However, the representative for FEA who did present the Mercer study clarified that a 1:16 teacher to student ratio for K through 3 and a 1:25 student to teacher ratio for 4 through 12 was accounted for in the Mercer study. So classroom sizes likely wouldn't change, but the size of the school itself would. Meadowlark stands out and stood out to a lot of parents as it would have a capacity of 800. That doesn't necessarily mean that 800 students would be enrolled, but it could hold up to 800 students. The Mercer study also didn't suggest to the board how they should shift students from the closing schools to new schools. They left that freedom up to the board and to the district themselves. A lot of parents weren't convinced by this leniency. They expressed concern to the board about how devastating closing schools is and about the lack of input, begging the board to delay their decision and take public comment, as there wasn't any public comment on this Mercer study. Heather Webb emailed the Wyoming Tribune Eagle the morning after the meeting. Her husband spoke at the meeting as well. She told us that, quote, "I guarantee if parents and neighbors in Cheyenne knew about this plan and proposal, they would have shown up to advocate to keep their schools. We found out this plan and meeting late last week. We had to call in to put our names down to speak and then attend." Webb also included that some triads weren't well represented, which was brought up by ARP teachers who mentioned that ARP parents weren't able to take the time and be there, and often ARP teachers have to advocate for their students. And while it was wonderful to have Central Triad students' parents present, it shouldn't necessarily be the deciding factor for the board just because not all parents could attend. And Webb did mention that according to the way that public comment was held and the sign-up situation where parents had to sign up the Friday before, a lot of parents were unable to voice their opinions. Some teachers did contest this idea that an increased number of students in a school would affect the quality of education. Second grade teacher at ARP Elementary, Lisa Hurd, was particularly vocal about the quality of education being dependent on the teachers themselves and the quality of staff.
And just because the school is bigger doesn't necessarily mean that the education is worse. Our students, all of the students in LCSD1 deserve the opportunity, the equity in education. We have several schools who have no equity in that education because of either condition or capacity in their school.
Ultimately, because of the way the Mercer study was presented as an all-in type of option, the board opted to support the Mercer study through to the next step, though several expressed not feeling like they had much of a choice in the matter to begin with. Trustee Brittany Ashby told attendees that the board had been dealing with the ARP issue for years, and other buildings in the South Triad are not far behind from being in poor condition as well, and they do need to address that.
Do I think there might be other solutions out there? Maybe, but I don't know that we've been given a choice to explore them. I don't disagree with any of you. I don't disagree with the data. But I also know that we have an immediate problem that we've got to solve.
In a relatively rare instance, the entire board voted for the Mercer study while all agreeing that they hated voting for the Mercer study. Trustee Alicia Smith expressed that this was the hardest decision that's come before her in her 4 years on the board. And while she wasn't happy with the way that they were having to vote, she didn't really see another option, and it broke her heart to see how this hurt the community.
I'm going to have to vote to accept the findings of the study, and I'm sorry. I hope you all hear our hearts up here. I don't ever want to vote like this again. This is really hard, but in doing that, we, maybe can improve some of our facilities, and we will, at least from the get-go, be providing equitable schools and equitable opportunities for a third of the kids in this district. And I think that's really important to do that. So, sorry.
There's still a chance that the Mercer study won't be approved by the School Facilities Commission. However, Carlson did mention that she thought it was very unlikely that they wouldn't approve it since it was coming before them with a vote from the board and the recommendation of her department. Parents aren't necessarily done with this fight either. Heather Webb and Franz Fuchs confirmed to the WTE on Tuesday that they'll be encouraging the board to reconsider their vote. Webb told the WTE that the community is really upset and their lack of involvement in this study is really concerning to them. Proponents who will continue to push against this decision mentioned that they felt it was an overstep of the FEA organization that did the Mercer and of Carlson to frame this as an all or nothing option. Carlson did walk the board through the pros and cons of each option and answered all of the questions that the board had regarding any potential alternatives, which Smith expressed towards the end of the meeting. As of now, the board's vote is to concur with the study, and it will move forward to the School Facilities Commission for final approval on November 6th and 7th. The commission has the final say regarding the approval of Mercer, and once Mercer is approved, funds will be released to start construction on ARP.
That's all for this week's episode of The Perch. Thank you to Hannah and Ivy for contributing this week. Be sure to tune back in next week to catch the latest on Cheyenne and Laramie County local news. But that's all for now.